Karen installed a speed bump and wrecked an FBI surveillance van. You don't expect federal operations to fall apart because of a suburban mom with a cement mixer and too much free time, but that's exactly what happened. It was 8:34 a.m. on a Tuesday when the van hit it, unmarked, all black, low riding, the kind of vehicle that would have gone unnoticed if it weren't for the screech that followed a gut-churning grind of metal against concrete, followed by a thud that made the whole street shake. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee still in hand, just in time to see the back wheels lock and the vehicle list sideways, smoke hissing from underneath. Then I saw the bump, freshly poured, uneven, and sun-bleached in streaks, still damp at the edges. It hadn't been there yesterday. Let me back up. I'm Elijah Crane, 45, divorced, quiet, federal security contractor, usually off the grid. I bought a house in Willow Glen, a cul-de-sac just outside Richmond, Virginia, because it was quiet. Too quiet, some days. That is, until Karen moved in. Karen McNally, volleyball mom by day, self-declared infrastructure czar by night. She arrived 6 months ago and immediately started taking notes. Complaints about lawn heights, suggestions about mailbox paint, but her real obsession, speed. She'd clock every car with a radar app on her phone, claimed everyone was going too fast for community safety. Mind you, we're talking about a neighborhood where the average age is 52 and half the people drive hybrids. Still, she wasn't satisfied. Then she started warning people at HOA meetings that she'd handle it herself if the board didn't act. We all rolled our eyes. We didn't think she meant literally. Until that morning, that's when the speed bump appeared. No warning, no signs, just poured concrete in the middle of Elderberry Drive, spanning both lanes like a middle finger to municipal code. No permits, no authorization, no engineering. Just Karen, 2 teenagers she paid under the table, and a rented mixer from Home Depot. The kicker, the van she destroyed FBI. Unmarked surveillance. Parked and moving between locations for an ongoing federal counter-fraud operation involving a known cyber ring. And that bump, it shattered their axle and exposed their presence. Within minutes, agents were out, scanning the area, radioing in damage reports and blowing up my entire block's morning routine. But Karen, she walked up to the scene in her neon vest, sunglasses on, sipping a smoothie like she was proud. "I told you all this road needed order," she said, smiling. That's when one of the agents turned to her. "Ma'am, do you realize what you've done?" Karen scoffed. "You people act like I didn't do you a favor." I remember the agent's face stone cold. "You may have just compromised an active federal investigation." The agents didn't raise their voices. They didn't have to. One of them, a tall guy in a navy windbreaker with a telltale earpiece still coiled behind his neck, walked slowly toward the broken front end of the van. The front axle had split. Something was leaking transmission fluid or brake line. I couldn't tell from where I stood. The left tire was bent at a weird angle, like a snapped wrist. The other agent stared at Karen like he was waiting for her to say something smart. She didn't. She pulled her sunglasses down and said, "I filed a neighborhood variance. It's all legal." That's when I almost spit my coffee out. A variance. You don't get to reroute federal ops with a variance scribbled on printer paper in your kitchen. Let me back up a bit. Karen's been obsessed with neighborhood traffic safety since the first week she moved in, claims she nearly got hit by a Prius, filed 4 noise complaints in the same month, even measured tire tread marks on the road outside her house with a ruler. The HOA, what's left of it, is practically toothless. It used to be a proper board, but after years of burnout and folks moving away, it's mostly Karen and her friend Nancy pretending to be the entire committee. They don't vote, they declare. Karen had been warning for weeks, "I'll install a speed deterrent if the board won't." We thought she meant a plastic sign or those annoying little flags shaped like turtles, not reinforced, poured concrete across a public road. Now the FBI was here, and they weren't amused. Agent number 1 Mason, I'd learn later, asked again, this time sharper, "Ma'am, who authorized you to modify federal use infrastructure?" Karen's smile faltered. "It's not federal. This is a neighborhood street. Mason pointed calmly. Elderberry Drive is classified as a shared access point for federal operational flow. That bump you poured didn't just damage a surveillance vehicle. It blew a 6-month stakeout. Karen blinked. Wait, you're saying you're FBI? He raised a brow. I'm saying you interfered with an active investigation into cyber terrorism. You could feel the air leave the street. Even the mailman stopped mid-step. By noon, the entire cul-de-sac was blocked off. 4 more unmarked black SUVs, a county sheriff cruiser, someone in a DHS jacket standing under my neighbor's magnolia tree, talking into a phone like the world was ending. Karen sat in a lawn chair outside her house, arms crossed, playing the victim. This is exactly why we need safer streets. She whined to no one in particular. Her husband hadn't come outside once. Smart man. That evening, after the agents left, the sheriff called a neighborhood meeting. We packed into the Willow Glen community room like it was a hurricane drill. Sheriff Diaz stood at the front and said it clear: a private citizen modified a public road without permission. That modification compromised federal surveillance and endangered the lives of several undercover agents. That is a felony offense. Karen wasn't there, but her name was. A lot. People who'd kept quiet before started talking. Mr. Flanagan, 3 doors down, said Karen threatened to report his dog for vehicular intimidation. Another woman said Karen warned her she'd call city enforcement if her wind chimes weren't down by dusk. She wasn't just opinionated. She was weaponizing rules that didn't exist. And now someone had the receipts. The next day, Ben from 2 houses over brought me a folder. He'd been collecting Karen's flyers, emails, and HOA memos for 6 months. There were dozens, all signed by Karen, all written like law. One even had her fake HOA logo watermarked behind it, a rose vine shaped into a K. We flipped through the stack while drinking on my back porch. He pointed at one with a smirk. Here, she fined me $50 for parking my motorcycle in my own driveway. I shook my head. She made a fake rule book and fined people to feed her ego. Ben nodded. Yeah, but this time she didn't just hurt feelings. She hurt a van the U.S.N. government cares about. By sunset, the word was out. Karen was under investigation. FBI, county, municipal, and possibly civil lawsuits from her own neighbors. And she still didn't get it. She posted on Nextdoor that night, accusing certain individuals of exploiting minor vehicle damage for political drama. Attached was a blurry photo of the broken van and a caption that said, "Safety, speed, spies." Karen didn't show up at the emergency HOA meeting the next night, but her name filled every square inch of the room. The folding chairs in Willow Glen's old rec center creaked under the weight of outrage. Elderly couples, working parents, young professionals, folks who hadn't said a word in months were suddenly holding printed flyers and copies of violation letters they'd received from her, complete with fines, threats, and legal language that looked legit enough to fool people. But not anymore. The first to speak was Marcus Tran, a software developer who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. She told me I couldn't install a Ring doorbell without architectural approval, he said, holding up a printed email. Said it was a privacy violation. The crowd murmured. Then Mrs. Devora, an 84-year-old widow, raised her hand. Her voice was shaky but firm. She made me pay her $95 for having potted plants too close to the sidewalk. The room went still. She told me she was part of a legal task force. She even had a badge. A badge. I stood in the back, arms folded, watching people realize together what they hadn't dared say alone. Karen had manipulated us all. Later that night, I stepped onto my porch and found a man standing beside the broken remnants of the FBI surveillance van, still parked across the street, cordoned off by traffic cones and plastic tape. He introduced himself as Special Agent Vincent Hale, FBI Internal Oversight. He was short, calm, serious, looked like he'd stepped out of a 1980s legal drama, but spoke like a man who had seen enough to not waste words. I've read your file, he said. You work in critical infrastructure security. Right. I nodded. Retired. Contracting now. We have a problem, he said simply. Karen. She may be small time, But her interference just wrecked 6 months of work. And worse, our target moved. The leak cost us a live tail. I exhaled. And you think she did it intentionally? Vincent shook his head. I think she doesn't care. And that's almost more dangerous. The next morning, Agent Hale paid Karen a visit. He brought a federal warrant. 2 black SUVs followed. Karen answered the door wearing a silk robe and holding a protein smoothie like she was expecting brunch. Not a federal raid. But when they showed her the papers, the color drained from her face. The charges: obstruction of federal operations, illegal modification of public infrastructure, impersonation of municipal authority, fraud by misrepresentation, civil extortion, pending investigation. She tried to bluster. This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to keep kids safe. But Hale didn't blink. You're being taken into federal custody. Ma'am. The image of her being let out of her house in handcuffs hit local news by noon. But the internet did the rest. The story went viral within hours. Suburban Karen installs illegal speed bump, destroys FBI van, gets arrested. The comments were brutal. Some laughed, some raged. But what stuck most were the stories that came out next. Dozens of people across nearby neighborhoods came forward, folks who dealt with similar fake HOAs. Power-hungry residents acting like officials, using fear and fake citations to control people. One man in Henrico County said he'd paid over $300 in monthly community dues to a woman who wasn't even on a board. Karen was just the most spectacular example of a growing problem. The FBI's internal report noted her behavior as a contributing factor in the exposure of an active surveillance team and recommended increased public education on local authority limits. The county passed Resolution 289F 3 weeks later. All modifications to public streets must be pre-approved through municipal engineering and posted publicly with notice of no less than 14 days. They named it informally the McNally Clause, Karen's legacy. She was denied bond after the first hearing. Her lawyer tried to claim she was mentally unwell, but the paper trail told another story: meticulously written violation letters, bank statements, her own emails referring to herself as Director of Local Traffic Compliance. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a takeover. And now, it was over. Karen's arrest didn't just disrupt Willow Glen. It tore open a wound we didn't know we had. You could feel it in the way people walked the sidewalks again, slower, like they were checking to make sure the street was theirs. You saw it in the trash bins that rolled out confidently on unsanctioned days. You heard it in the clinking of wind chimes Karen once fined people for. But freedom, after fear, feels strange, like you're waiting for a knock that never comes. 2 days after the arrest, I got a visit from a reporter, Mallory Fields, local, sharp, mid-30s with a notebook that never left her hand. She asked me one question that I still think about. What do you think gave her the power to do all this? I thought for a long moment. Then said, the silence of good neighbors. Karen's home sat dark for a week. Then the feds moved in. Her emails had revealed more than just fake HOA letters. They uncovered documents she drafted to start charging annual assessments for community safety infrastructure. She planned to invoice every house on the block for $120. Monthly, she'd even mocked up an online payment portal, one click away from turning Willow Glen into her private kingdom. It wasn't just a speed bump. It was the first step in a plan to build what she called in one document a model for residential microgovernance. It sounded like a TED Talk, but read like a con. The FBI concluded their investigation and released an internal memo to federal agencies, warning them to thoroughly vet all suburban surveillance zones for non-municipal modifications. Willow Glen became a cautionary tale. The restitution phase came next. Thanks to the federal and local charges, the court ordered Karen's assets to be liquidated: her car, the remodeled kitchen, even her lawn furniture, which ironically had once violated her own spacing code. The money funded the Community Restitution and Awareness Fund, set up through the county clerk's office. Every resident who had been fined, threatened, or damaged by Karen's homemade ordinances got a check. Mrs. Devora cried when she got hers. Not because it made her whole, but because it made her feel seen. The community rallied. Ben and Marcus created a real civic group, the Willow Glen Citizens Alliance. No fines, no forms, just open meetings, transparency, and neighbor-to-neighbor help. The first thing they did, hold a public vote to remove the speed bump. And when it was jackhammered out 2 weeks later, half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Someone brought lawn chairs, another brought lemonade. They clapped when the last chunk of concrete cracked, not out of vengeance but relief. A month later, we held the first official community potluck in years. No HOA, no rules, just people, food, and music. I grilled burgers. Marcus brought ribs. Sophia played acoustic guitar on a folding chair. Someone even handed out t-shirts that said, "Speed bumps shouldn't break surveillance vans." I kept mine, framed it. Karen's trial was set for 3 months out, but we already knew how it'd end. She was facing 5 federal counts, 3 municipal, and multiple civil suits from neighbors and the FBI itself. But this story was no longer about her. It was about what came after. We painted the old community bulletin board with a new quote: "Power is not taken, it is given. Sometimes by fear, sometimes by silence, and sometimes by simply looking away." Not anymore. Karen's trial lasted 5 days. The courtroom wasn't packed with strangers. It was packed with her neighbors. Every seat filled by people who had received fines for lawn flamingos, holiday lights, chalk drawings, or the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. Every testimony chipped away at the illusion she built from printer paper and fear. The prosecution brought in Special Agent Hale, who detailed how the surveillance van was part of a 6-month undercover operation on a foreign-linked cybercrime network. The operation had to be moved, compromised, and ultimately dissolved after Karen's homemade speed bump shattered the van's axle and blew its covert cover. That's not a neighborhood misunderstanding. That's federal obstruction. Her lawyer tried to frame it as overzealous civic pride. But pride doesn't forge violation letters with fake municipal seals. Pride doesn't extort senior citizens. Pride doesn't charge neighbors for zone harmony violations or impersonate government officials. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. 11 years. Federal prison. No parole for the first 5. Karen wept. But her tears weren't for the people she hurt. They were for the kingdom she lost. Greg filed for divorce 2 weeks later, moved to Michigan, left the house, the car, everything. It sat empty for a while, foreclosure notice on the door, like a final stamp of karma. The city bought it at auction, converted it into a community center and outreach office, where residents could learn about tenant rights, civic responsibilities, and how to recognize signs of fraudulent authority. They named it the Glen House, and in poetic full circle, it's located directly across from where the speed bump once sat. Mr. Flanagan, the man Karen once tried to find for a wind chime, became the first chairperson of the Willow Glen Community Forum. Sophia took charge of communications. Marcus drafted the bylaws. Me, I sat back and watched. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally could. The final community BBQ drew record turnout. We grilled where the FBI van once broke down. Kids rode bikes over fresh pavement, no bumps, no fear. The chalk art stretched across 3 driveways. One piece stood out, a cartoon badge, cracked clean down the center, next to the words, "Authority is not a costume." Everyone nodded, because they knew what it meant. I stayed late after the party that night, watched the sun go down from my porch. The street felt clean again, not just from the new asphalt, but from the absence of fear, the absence of her. We like to think tyranny wears a crown, but sometimes it wears a clipboard and waves at you every morning. Sometimes it speaks softly but carries a fake citation. And too often, it wins not because it's strong, but because it counts on your silence. So here's what I've learned. If someone makes a rule, ask who gave them the right. If someone hands you a violation, ask where the law says so. If someone threatens your peace, stand with your neighbors. Because justice doesn't always roll in with sirens. Sometimes it walks across the street with pie and says, "Not here, not anymore." Now it's your turn. Have you ever seen fake authority get out of control? Have you ever been silenced in your own neighborhood? Drop your story below. Let's remind the world community isn't built with fear. It's built with people who refuse to look away.